one queen was locked away by her own family for almost half a century. Another was rejected by her royal husband on their wedding night and spent the next 2 decades fighting for her status. A child queen, widowed before she was even a teenager, faced pressure to marry the son of the man who had overthrown her husband. An empress, the rightful heir to a kingdom, had to fight a brutal 19-year war for her crown, only to see her son eventually wear it. Number 8. Isabella of Valois, the 6-year-old queen. Isabella of Valois was born a princess of France in Paris in the autumn of 1389. Her father was King Charles VI of France, a man who suffered from bouts of severe mental illness, and her mother was Isabeau of Bavaria. Isabella's childhood was set against the backdrop of war between France and England, the long conflict known as the 100 Years' War. In an attempt to bring peace, or at least a truce, a marriage was arranged. In October 1396, Isabella, who had not yet turned 7 years old, was married to King Richard II of England. Richard was 29. The wedding took place in Calais, a town then held by the English. Chronicles of the time noted the lavishness of the ceremonies and the youth of the bride. Richard II was reportedly gentle and kind to his child queen. He treated her with respect and gave her gifts. She had her own household at Windsor and other royal residences, and contemporary accounts suggest she was a pretty and well-mannered child. The marriage was political. It secured a 28-year truce between England and France. It was understood that the marriage would only be consummated when Isabella was older. For now, she was a symbol of peace and a companion to the king. This fragile peace and Isabella's relatively settled life were shattered just 3 years later. In 1399, Richard II was overthrown by his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, who became King Henry IV. Richard was imprisoned and died in February 1400, likely murdered at Pontefract Castle. Isabella, now a widow at the age of 10, found herself in a precarious position. She was the daughter of the French king, living in the court of the man who had deposed and likely killed her husband. Henry IV initially treated Isabella with consideration. He housed her comfortably, away from London and Sunninghill. However, he also had plans for her. Henry IV proposed that Isabella should marry his own son, Prince Henry, the future King Henry V. Prince Henry was only a few years older than Isabella. This marriage would have maintained the English alliance with France and further legitimized Henry IV's new dynasty. Isabella, despite her young age, refused. She mourned Richard and showed a strong loyalty to his memory. She would not consider marrying the son of his enemy. Her refusal created a diplomatic issue. Isabella wanted to return to France. Her father, King Charles VI, demanded her return along with her dowry and jewels. Henry IV was reluctant to let her go, perhaps still hoping she would change her mind about marrying his son or using her as a bargaining chip in negotiations with France. He also delayed the full repayment of her dowry. For over a year, Isabella remained in England, effectively a well-treated captive. Finally, in 1401, Henry IV agreed to allow Isabella to return to France. She traveled back to her home country, but a significant portion of her valuable dowry was never returned by the English crown. Back in France, her life as a political pawn continued. She was still young, pretty, and a princess. In 1404, there were negotiations for her to marry her cousin Charles, Count of Angoulême. Then, in 1406, when Isabella was 16, she was married to another cousin Charles, Duke of Orléans. Her new husband was only 11 years old. Charles of Orléans would later become one of France's most famous poets, writing much of his work while a prisoner in England after the Battle of Agincourt. Isabella's marriage to Charles of Orléans was short-lived. 3 years after their wedding, in September 1409, Isabella died in childbirth at Blois. She was just 19 years old. Her daughter, Joan of Valois, survived and later married John II, Duke of Alençon. Isabella of Valois, Queen of England for a fleeting few years, as a child spent her brief life caught in the web of international politics, her marriages and movements dictated by the needs of kings and countries. Number 7. Agnes of Merania. The king's beloved, the Pope's target, Agnes of Merania entered the turbulent world of French royalty in the late 12th century. Born around 1175, she was the daughter of Berthold IV, Duke of Merania, a region in the Holy Roman Empire. Her life took a dramatic turn when King Philip II of France, also known as Philip Augustus, sought her hand in marriage. Philip had a complicated marital history. He had married Isabella of Hainault, who died in 1190, leaving him with a son, Louis. His second marriage, in 1193, was to Ingeborg of Denmark. For reasons that remain somewhat mysterious, perhaps a sudden aversion or a political miscalculation, Philip repudiated Ingeborg the very day after their wedding. He claimed they were too closely related for the marriage to be valid. Despite Ingeborg's appeals to the Pope in Rome and her insistence that the marriage was valid and consummated, Philip kept her imprisoned and sought an annulment. The papacy, however, refused to grant it. Undeterred, Philip, considering himself free, decided to marry again. His choice fell upon Agnes of Merania. They were married in June 1196. Agnes was described by chroniclers as being exceptionally beautiful. Philip was apparently deeply enamored with her, and for a few years they lived as husband and wife. Agnes was crowned Queen of France. Their union produced 2 children, a daughter, Marie, and a son, Philip, known as Philip Hurapel, the Hairy, or the Bristly. However, the shadow of Ingeborg and the disapproval of the Church loomed large. Pope Celestine III had condemned Philip's actions but had not taken the most severe measures. When Innocent III became Pope in 1198, the situation intensified. Innocent III was a powerful and determined pontiff, keen on asserting papal authority. He would not tolerate Philip's defiance regarding Ingeborg. He ordered Philip to take Ingeborg back as his wife and queen. When Philip refused, Pope Innocent III placed the entire Kingdom of France under an interdict in January 1200. An interdict was a severe spiritual punishment. It meant that most church services and sacraments were forbidden. Churches were closed. No masses were said. Marriages could not be celebrated in church, and Christian burials were denied. Only baptisms for newborns and last rites for the dying were permitted. This created immense distress and unrest among the population, putting huge pressure on Philip. His nobles and bishops urged him to relent. Faced with widespread discontent and the spiritual anxieties of his subjects, Philip eventually yielded, at least outwardly. In August 1200, at a council in Nasle, he agreed to separate from Agnes. Agnes, who had been his queen and the mother of his children, was sent away from court to the castle of Poissy. Sources suggest she was heartbroken by this forced separation. Philip, it seems, also found the separation difficult. Agnes of Merania did not live long after being cast aside. She died at Poissy in July or August 1201, possibly from grief or complications following childbirth. She was buried at the convent of St. Corentin, near Nantes. Even after her death, her children's status was uncertain. Because Philip's marriage to Agnes was deemed invalid by the Church as long as Ingeborg lived, and was considered Philip's wife, Marie and Philip were technically illegitimate. Philip, despite having to publicly acknowledge Ingeborg again, though he continued to keep her confined for many more years, worked to secure the legitimacy of his children with Agnes. He appealed to Pope Innocent III. In November 1201, the Pope agreed to legitimize Marie and Philip, partly due to Philip's renewed, though nominal, reconciliation with Ingeborg, and partly due to political considerations. The children were declared legitimate and able to inherit. Agnes of Merania, a woman who found herself at the center of a power struggle between a determined king and an equally determined pope, became a casualty of their conflict. Her marriage dissolved and her life cut short. Number 6. Jacqueline of Hainault. 4 husbands, no crown, and a lost inheritance. Jacqueline, Countess of Hainault, Holland, and Zeeland, and Lady of Friesland, was born in 1401, an heiress to significant territories in the Low Countries. Her life was a dramatic saga of multiple marriages, political intrigue, and a constant struggle to maintain her inheritance and autonomy in a world dominated by powerful male relatives and ambitious rulers. Her story is one of a woman with titles and lands, yet whose control over her own destiny was perpetually challenged. Her marital career began early. At the age of 14 in 1415, she was married to John Dauphin of France, son of King Charles VI. This union was intended to strengthen ties between Hainault and France. However, John died just 2 years later, in 1417, leaving Jacqueline a widow at 16. Her substantial inheritance made her a very attractive match. Her second marriage in 1418 was to her cousin John IV, Duke of Brabant. This marriage proved to be deeply unhappy. John of Brabant was considered weak and ineffective. He mismanaged Jacqueline's territories, even mortgaging parts of Holland and Zeeland to his cousin John of Bavaria, who contested Jacqueline's claim to these lands. Jacqueline, a spirited and determined woman, found the marriage intolerable. In 1420, she publicly repudiated John of Brabant and fled her husband's court, seeking refuge first in Hainault and then in 1421 in England. In England, Jacqueline hoped to find support for her cause and an annulment of her marriage to John of Brabant. She caught the eye of Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, the younger brother of King Henry V of England, and a powerful figure in English politics. They married in late 1422 or early 1423, before a definitive papal annulment of her marriage to John of Brabant was secured. This third marriage was controversial from the start. While an English-friendly pope, Martin V, might have been swayed, the political realities were complex. Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy, another powerful cousin of Jacqueline's, and a rival for influence in the Low Countries, opposed the marriage and supported John of Brabant. Humphrey, eager to claim Jacqueline's lands, launched a military expedition to Hainault in 1424. This intervention was poorly planned and ultimately unsuccessful. It also strained England's alliance with Burgundy, which was crucial for the ongoing 100 Years' War against France. John of Brabant died in 1427, which might have simplified matters, but by then Pope Martin V had declared Jacqueline's marriage to Humphrey of Gloucester invalid because her marriage to John of Brabant had still been considered valid at the time of her English wedding. Humphrey, perhaps seeing little further political gain, or having tired of the struggle, gradually distanced himself from Jacqueline and her cause. He found a new romantic interest in Eleanor Cobham, one of Jacqueline's ladies-in-waiting, whom he later married. Abandoned by Humphrey, Jacqueline's position deteriorated. Philip the Good of Burgundy systematically consolidated his power over her territories. In 1428, after being defeated and captured, Jacqueline was forced to sign the Treaty of Delft. By this treaty, she had to make Philip the Good her regent and heir to Hainault, Holland, and Zeeland. She was effectively stripped of her power and forbidden to remarry without Philip's consent. Despite these restrictions, Jacqueline made one last bid for personal happiness. In 1432, she secretly married Frank van Borsel, a powerful Zeeland nobleman. When Philip the Good discovered the marriage, he imprisoned Frank. To secure his release, Jacqueline was compelled, in 1433, to formally abdicate all her rights to her counties in favor of Philip of Burgundy. She was left with the title of Countess and a pension, but her lands were gone. She retired to live with Frank van Borsel at Teylingen Castle. Her turbulent life came to an end not long after. Jacqueline died of tuberculosis in 1436 at the age of 35. Her extensive inheritance had passed entirely into the hands of the Duke of Burgundy. Number 5. Constance of Sicily, the reluctant queen and the emperor's mother. Constance of Sicily was born in 1154, a posthumous daughter of Roger II, the first Norman king of Sicily. Her position as a potential heiress was complicated by the fact she was a woman and by the existence of other male relatives in the Norman line. For many years, she lived a relatively obscure life, some accounts even suggesting she resided in a monastery, possibly as a nun, though this is debated by historians. Her life changed dramatically when she was in her early 30s. In 1184, William II of Sicily, Constance's nephew, was childless and needed to secure the succession. He named Constance as his heir and arranged her marriage to Henry, the son of the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick Barbarossa. The marriage took place in Milan in January 1186. Constance was 31, and Henry, the future Emperor Henry VI, was 20. This union was a major political move designed to potentially unite the wealthy Kingdom of Sicily, which included southern Italy, with the Holy Roman Empire. However, the Sicilian nobles were wary of German influence and were not enthusiastic about this arrangement. They feared losing their autonomy. When William II died without an heir in 1189, Constance was, by his designation, the rightful successor. However, the Sicilian barons, preferring a local ruler, chose Tancred of Lech, an illegitimate cousin of Constance, as their king. This decision plunged the kingdom into turmoil. Henry, who became Emperor Henry VI in 1191, was determined to claim his wife's inheritance. He and Constance launched military campaigns to conquer Sicily. Their initial attempts were met with resistance, and Henry even suffered a serious setback due to plague in his army. It was not until 1194 that Henry VI finally conquered the Kingdom of Sicily. Constance was crowned Queen of Sicily in Palermo. At this time, Constance, then aged 40, was pregnant with her first child. Given her advanced age for childbearing in that era, and the political need to ensure the legitimacy of her heir, stories circulated that she took extraordinary measures. According to some chroniclers, to dispel any doubts about the child's parentage and to prove she was indeed the mother, Constance gave birth in a public tent erected in the main square of the town of Jesi in central Italy, inviting local matrons to witness the event. In December 1194, she gave birth to a son, Frederick, who would later become the famous Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, known as Stupor Mundi, Wonder of the World. Henry VI ruled Sicily with a harsh hand, which generated resentment among his new subjects. His reign there was short. He died suddenly of illness in Messina in September 1197. Their son, Frederick, was only 3 years old. Constance now found herself a widow and regent for her young son in a kingdom still simmering with anti-German sentiment and internal strife. She acted decisively to secure her son's inheritance and to assert Sicilian independence from imperial control. She distanced herself from Henry VI's German ministers and advisors, sending many of them away. She had young Frederick crowned King of Sicily in Palermo in May 1198. Constance's regency was a period of constant political maneuvering. She had to contend with rebellious barons, German warlords who refused to leave, and the overarching influence of the papacy, which was the feudal overlord of Sicily. She sought the protection of Pope Innocent III for her son. Constance herself did not live much longer. She died in November 1198, just over a year after her husband. In her will, she named Pope Innocent III as the guardian of young Frederick, a decision that would profoundly shape his early life and reign. Constance, thrust into power late in life, faced war, political intrigue, and the immense responsibility of safeguarding a kingdom for her child. Number 4. Urraca of Leon and Castile, the queen who battled her own husband. Urraca of Leon and Castile, born around 1081, was a formidable figure in 12th century Spain, a queen regnant who wielded power in her own right. She was the eldest surviving child of King Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile and Constance of Burgundy. Her path to the throne was not direct. She was initially married to Raymond of Burgundy, a French nobleman, with whom she had a son, Alfonso Raymundez, the future Alfonso VII. However, her younger half-brother Sancho was Alfonso VI's designated heir. The course of Urraca's life changed when Sancho was killed in battle in 1108. Suddenly, Urraca became the heir presumptive to her father's extensive Christian kingdoms in Iberia. Alfonso VI, aging and concerned about the stability of his realm, particularly in the face of threats from the Almoravid dynasty from North Africa, made a crucial decision for Urraca's future. He arranged her marriage to Alfonso I, King of Aragon and Navarre, known as Alfonso the Battler. The marriage was intended to unite the Christian kingdoms of Leon, Castile, and Aragon-Navarre, creating a powerful bloc. Urraca was already a widow, as Raymond of Burgundy had died in 1107. Urraca became Queen Regnant of Leon and Castile upon her father's death in 1109, and shortly thereafter she married Alfonso the Battler. From the outset, the marriage was a disaster. Urraca and Alfonso I had vastly different personalities and political ambitions. Urraca was a queen in her own right, accustomed to influence and determined to rule her ancestral lands. Alfonso the Battler was a renowned warrior, famously aggressive, and according to some accounts deeply misogynistic and disdainful of Urraca's authority. Chronicles suggest he was physically abusive towards her. The marriage quickly descended into open conflict. Alfonso I attempted to impose his rule over Leon and Castile, sidelining Urraca and her supporters. This led to deep divisions within the nobility. Many Leonese and Castilian nobles remained loyal to Urraca or favored her young son, Alfonso Raimundez, as their future king. The Galician nobility, in particular, championed the rights of young Alfonso. Civil war soon erupted. Urraca found herself not only fighting against her own husband, but also navigating complex alliances and rivalries among her own vassals. During these turbulent years, Urraca actively led her forces and engaged in political maneuvering. She proved to be a resilient and capable leader. Her personal life also became intertwined with the political struggles. She formed relationships with powerful nobles who supported her cause. One notable liaison was with Count Gomez Gonzalez, who died fighting for her at the Battle of Candispina in 1111. Later, she had a long-term relationship with Count Pedro González de Lara, with whom she had 2 illegitimate children. These relationships, while perhaps providing personal and political support, also gave her enemies ammunition to criticize her character. The marriage to Alfonso the Battler was so fraught with conflict that Urraca sought its dissolution. The Church eventually granted an annulment in 1114 on the grounds of consanguinity. They were distant cousins. However, Alfonso I did not readily relinquish his claims to her kingdoms, and intermittent warfare continued. Urraca also faced challenges from factions supporting her son, Alfonso Raimundez, who was coming of age and was eager to rule. She carefully managed this delicate situation, sometimes allying with her son, at other times reasserting her own authority. Urraca worked to secure the succession for Alfonso Raimundez, gradually transferring more responsibility to him as he matured. She reigned for 17 years, a period marked by almost constant warfare and political instability, much of it stemming from her disastrous arranged marriage. Urraca died in March 1126. Her son, Alfonso VII, succeeded her, inheriting a kingdom that his mother had fought fiercely to preserve and govern. Urraca's reign demonstrated the immense difficulties faced by a medieval queen regnant especially when burdened with a hostile and powerful husband. Number 3. Ingeborg of Denmark. 20 years a prisoner of her hateful husband. Ingeborg of Denmark was born a princess around 1174, the daughter of King Valdemar I of Denmark and Sophia of Minsk. Her life took a devastating turn when, at the age of about 18 or 19, she was chosen as a bride for King Philip II of France, also known as Philip Augustus. The marriage, which took place in Amiens on August 14, 1193, was a political alliance. Philip hoped to gain Danish naval support and possibly leverage Old Danish claims to the English throne. Ingeborg brought a substantial dowry. The very next day, August 15, 1193, during Ingeborg's coronation ceremony, King Philip suddenly and inexplicably displayed a profound aversion to his new wife. He appeared pale and trembling, and abruptly tried to have the marriage annulled. The reasons for Philip's immediate repudiation of Ingeborg remain a subject of speculation. Some chroniclers suggested he found her physically repulsive, perhaps due to bad breath, or some other unrecorded characteristic. Others hinted at a pre-existing attachment, or simply a fickle and ruthless nature on Philip's part. Whatever the cause, Philip was determined to be rid of her. Ingeborg, a young woman in a foreign land, barely able to speak French, was shocked and bewildered. When Philip tried to send her back to Denmark, she refused to leave. She repeatedly insisted the marriage was valid and consummated, uttering the words Mala Francia, bad France, and Roma, Rome, indicating her appeal to the Pope. Philip, frustrated by her defiance, began what would become 2 decades of imprisonment for Ingeborg. She was moved from one place of confinement to another, monasteries, fortresses and castles, often kept in harsh conditions, isolated, and deprived of comforts. Philip immediately sought an annulment from the church, claiming the marriage was invalid due to consanguinity. They were, like many European royals, distantly related. However, this was a common pretext for unwanted marriages, and the Danish royal family, along with Ingeborg herself, vigorously contested it. They appealed to the papacy. Pope Celestine III, and, later more forcefully, Pope Innocent III, sided with Ingeborg. They declared the marriage valid and refused to grant Philip the annulment he craved. Philip, however, was not easily deterred. In 1196, defying the Pope, he went through a marriage ceremony with Agnes of Merania, a noblewoman from Bavaria with whom he was deeply infatuated. This bigamous union enraged Pope Innocent III, who was determined to uphold the sanctity of marriage and papal authority. In 1200, Innocent III placed the entire Kingdom of France under an interdict, a powerful spiritual weapon that suspended most church services and sacraments. This caused widespread public distress and put immense pressure on Philip. To have the interdict lifted, Philip reluctantly agreed, in 1201, to send Agnes of Merania away and to nominally take Ingeborg back as his wife. Agnes died shortly thereafter. However, Philip's reconciliation with Ingeborg was a sham. As soon as the interdict was removed, he promptly imprisoned her again, this time in the castle of Étampes. For years, Ingeborg endured her captivity. She wrote poignant letters to Pope Innocent III, detailing her suffering: neglect, insufficient food and clothing, isolation from Danish visitors, and being denied access to priests or the sacraments. She consistently maintained her innocence and the validity of her marriage. Finally, after nearly 20 years of separation and imprisonment, Philip's stance towards Ingeborg changed. In 1213, for complex political reasons, he was planning an invasion of England and needed papal support. And to ensure Danish neutrality or even assistance, Philip abruptly reconciled with Ingeborg. She was brought back to the French court and formally acknowledged as Queen of France. Why Philip suddenly relented after so long remains debated, but political expediency seems the most likely motive. Ingeborg lived out the rest of her life with the dignity of a queen, though it is unlikely her relationship with Philip ever became warm or affectionate. She outlived him by more than a decade. Philip II died in 1223. Ingeborg dedicated much of her later life to religious piety and founded the Priory of St. John en Isle near Corbeil, where she spent many of her final years. She died in 1236 and was buried in the Church of the Knights Templar near Corbeil. Her 2 decades of unjust imprisonment stand as a stark example of the vulnerability of even royal women to the whims of powerful husbands. Number 2. Empress Matilda. The heir denied her crown. Matilda, also known as Maud, was born in 1102, the daughter of King Henry I of England and Matilda of Scotland. Her royal lineage was impeccable, tracing back to William the Conqueror on her father's side and the Anglo-Saxon kings of England through her mother. Her early life was one of privilege and high stakes. Politics. At the age of about 12, in 1114, she was married to Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor, thus earning her the title of Empress, by which she was often known, even after his death. Her status changed dramatically with a family tragedy. In 1120, Matilda's younger brother, William Adelin, the sole legitimate male heir to Henry I, drowned in the sinking of the White Ship. This disaster threw the English succession into uncertainty. Emperor Henry V died in 1125, and Matilda, now a 23-year-old widow without children from this marriage, returned to her father's domains in England and Normandy. King Henry I, determined to secure his lineage, designated Matilda as his heir presumptive. On several occasions, starting in 1127, he made his barons, including his nephew Stephen of Blois, swear solemn oaths to recognize Matilda as his successor and support her claim to the throne after his death. To further strengthen her position and hopefully produce male heirs, Henry I arranged a second marriage for Matilda. In 1128, she married Geoffrey Plantagenet, the young Count of Anjou. Matilda was about 26, while Geoffrey was only 14. The marriage was reportedly a stormy one, marked by frequent separations and personality clashes. Matilda was known for her proud and sometimes imperious nature, while Geoffrey was also strong-willed. Despite their difficulties, the marriage endured and produced 3 sons, the eldest of whom was Henry, the future King Henry II of England. When King Henry I died in December 1135, Matilda was in Anjou with her husband, pregnant with her 3rd son. This absence from England at a critical moment proved detrimental to her claim. Her cousin, Stephen of Blois, son of Henry I's sister Adela, moved swiftly. Breaking the oath he had sworn to Matilda, Stephen rushed to England, secured the support of London and key members of the clergy and nobility, and had himself crowned King of England. Many English and Norman barons preferred a male ruler over a woman, especially one married to Geoffrey of Anjou, a traditional rival of the Norman rulers. They rationalized their broken oaths by claiming Henry I had changed his mind on his deathbed, or that the oath was invalid because it had been extracted under duress. Matilda refused to accept this usurpation of her inheritance. Supported by her half-brother, Robert, Earl of Gloucester, and other loyal barons, she asserted her claim. This dispute plunged England and Normandy into a protracted and devastating civil war known as the Anarchy, which lasted for nearly 2 decades, 1135 to 1154. The country suffered greatly from the fighting, lawlessness, and widespread destruction. In 1139, Matilda landed in England to personally lead her forces. The war saw shifting fortunes. A major turning point came in April 1141, when Matilda's forces captured King Stephen at the Battle of Lincoln. With Stephen imprisoned, Matilda was declared Lady of the English, Domina Anglorum, and began preparations for her coronation as Queen in London. However, her triumph was short-lived. Contemporary accounts suggest that her haughty demeanor and demands for money alienated the citizens of London, who rose up against her before she could be crowned. She was forced to flee the city. Later that year, her key supporter, Robert of Gloucester, was captured by Stephen's forces. Matilda had to agree to exchange King Stephen for Robert, and the war continued. For several more years, fighting ebbed and flowed. Matilda established her base in the west of England, but she was never able to decisively defeat Stephen or gain widespread acceptance as queen. In 1148, with her cause in England faltering, Matilda withdrew to Normandy, which her husband, Geoffrey of Anjou, had largely conquered in her name. Though Matilda herself never wore the English crown, she did not give up the fight for her family's rights. She focused her efforts on promoting the claim of her eldest son, Henry Plantagenet. After years of further conflict, and with Henry now a capable young military leader, a resolution was finally reached. The Treaty of Wallingford, or Winchester, in 1153, stipulated that Stephen would remain king for life, but he recognized Matilda's son Henry as his heir. Stephen died the following year, in October 1154, and Henry Plantagenet ascended to the throne as King Henry II, founding the Plantagenet dynasty. Matilda spent her later years in Normandy, often acting as regent for Henry when he was in England. She died in 1167, having played a pivotal role in English history, an empress and rightful heir who was denied her crown largely due to her gender, but who ultimately ensured her son's succession. Number 1. Joanna of Castile. The queen they called mad and locked away. Joanna of Castile, known to history as Juana la Loca or Joanna the Mad, was born in Toledo, Spain in 1479. She was the third child and second daughter of the renowned Catholic monarchs, Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, whose marriage had united much of Spain. Joanna's early life was overshadowed by her more politically prominent elder siblings. However, a series of deaths in the family, her elder brother John, her elder sister Isabella, and Isabella's son Miguel, unexpectedly propelled Joanna into the position of heir presumptive to the vast Spanish kingdoms. In 1496, Joanna was married to Philip the Handsome, Archduke of Austria and Duke of Burgundy, son of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. This was a strategic dynastic alliance, common among European royalty. Joanna, by all accounts, fell deeply and passionately in love with Philip. He was, as his nickname suggests, considered very attractive, but he was also notoriously unfaithful. Philip's numerous infidelities caused Joanna immense distress, and reportedly led to public displays of intense jealousy and possessiveness. These episodes would later contribute to the narrative of her mental instability. When Isabella, the First of Castile, died in November 1504, her will designated Joanna as her successor, Queen of Castile. However, the will also contained clauses that allowed for her father, Ferdinand II of Aragon, to govern in her name if Joanna were absent from these my kingdoms, or being in them should not wish or should not be able to attend to the governance of them. This ambiguity opened the door for Joanna to be sidelined. Both her husband, Philip, and her father, Ferdinand, coveted the power to rule Castile. Joanna found herself caught in a bitter power struggle between the two most important men in her life. In 1506, Philip and Joanna traveled from the Netherlands to Castile to claim her inheritance. Philip actively worked to isolate Joanna and usurp her authority, seeking to have himself declared king. The Castilian Cortes, Parliament, eventually recognized Joanna as queen and Philip as king consort, but Philip effectively ruled. His reign was short. In September 1506, just a few months after arriving in Castile, Philip died suddenly in Burgos at the age of 28. His death, possibly from typhoid fever, plunged Joanna into a state of profound grief. It is Joanna's behavior following Philip's death that cemented her reputation for madness, a reputation actively promoted by those who wished to control her and her kingdoms. She was pregnant at the time of Philip's death and gave birth to their youngest child, Catherine, a few months later. Stories, some likely exaggerated or fabricated by her political opponents, circulated about her macabre devotion to Philip's corpse. It was said she refused to be separated from his coffin, traveling with it at night across the Castilian countryside for months, frequently ordering it opened so she could gaze upon his embalmed body. While her grief was undoubtedly extreme, her actions were interpreted through the lens of mental illness, making it easier for others to deem her unfit to rule. Her father, Ferdinand II of Aragon, seized the opportunity. He returned to Castile, declared Joanna incapable of governing, and assumed the regency in her name. In 1509, Ferdinand had Joanna confined to the royal palace in Tordesillas, a fortified castle overlooking the Douro River. She would remain imprisoned there for the rest of her long life. Her youngest daughter, Catherine, was initially allowed to stay with her, providing some companionship in her isolation. When Ferdinand II died in 1516, Joanna technically inherited the crown of Aragon as well, making her the nominal ruler of a united Spain. However, her son, Charles, the future Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who had been raised in Flanders, arrived in Spain to claim his inheritance. Charles, like his grandfather Ferdinand, continued Joanna's confinement. He co-ruled with his mother in name, with official documents issued in both their names, but all real power rested with Charles. Joanna remained Queen of Castile and Aragon on paper, but a prisoner in reality. During the revolt of the Comuneros, 1520 to 1521, a popular uprising against Charles's perceived foreign rule and heavy taxation, the rebels briefly captured Tordesillas. They tried to persuade Joanna to sign documents supporting their cause, hoping her authority as queen would legitimize their movement. Joanna, despite her years of confinement and alleged mental instability, refused to act against her son. Once Charles's forces crushed the revolt, he ensured his mother's imprisonment was even more secure. Joanna of Castile lived in the bleak confines of Tordesillas for 46 years, until her death in April 1555, at the age of 75. The true nature and extent of her mental illness remain a subject of historical debate. While she clearly suffered from periods of severe depression, anxiety, and possibly other psychological issues, these were exacerbated by intense grief, political manipulation, and decades of cruel imprisonment. Whether her madness was inherent or largely induced by her tragic circumstances, it served as a convenient pretext for her father, husband, and son to strip her of her power and liberty.